broadcasting from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Monday night edition of WilmsFront. It is the 11th of April, 2022. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube, DLive and Odyssey channels, as well as on the Interactive Entropy software. It is 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria, and the federal election has finally been called for Saturday, the 21st of May. Scott Morrison finally ended the agonizing period of political limbo post the budget, announcing the election yesterday after visiting the Governor-General in Canberra, who issued the election writs for the 151 seats of the House of Representatives and 40 of the 76 seats in the Senate. All of the news coverage yesterday had live pictures of Scott Morrison's plane going from Sydney to Canberra, and then they have the chopper following the Comcar 1, which he was using to go visit the Governor-General, which has the flags on the bonnet. So, and they have people live at outside Government House and all over the place. In the lead up to the official election campaign, Scott Morrison, he seemed to have done everything he could to remind voters of his worst character and political qualities. In recent interviews, he has been caught out blatantly lying. His pre-election federal budget had no fiscal management strategy for budget repair or cutting waste, but was all about buying people's votes at the ballot box. His focus on seeing everything as a political issue or problem was again brought back into focus by his government's response to the northern New South Wales floods, when at first they only granted disaster relief payments to towns in the federal National Party held seat of Page, which includes Lismore, before granting them to those towns in the federal Labor Party held seat of Richmond. This disregard of disaster affected people because they happen to live in a safe Labor seat saw New South Wales Liberal Upper House MLC Catherine Cusack resign her seat and from the party. Morrison has form on this partisan approach to funding as the previous sports rorts saga before the last federal election, along with car park rorts demonstrated. Morrison goes into this federal election not having achieved any major policy or political reforms over his nearly 4 years as Prime Minister. And if he is re-elected for another 3-year term, he hasn't really promised anything meaningful other than not being Labor and not being Anthony Albanese, who would definitely be weaker on national security, civil liberties, and on fiscal management. Albo had a shocker first day today when he didn't know what the official cash rate interest rate is, which is 0.1%, and didn't know the official unemployment rate, which is 4%. We had in the last sitting week, well, it was budget week, on budget night, actually, Scott Morrison's political character was systematically dismembered by outgoing New South Wales Liberal Senator Concetta Fierravanti-Wells, who in a 10-minute speech called Scott Morrison a fake conservative, fake Christian. He said he was not fit to be Prime Minister, was a ruthless bully and autocrat of the highest order. Concetta Fierravanti-Wells lost her winnable spot on the New South Wales Coalition Senate ticket, blaming a factional stitch-up between Immigration Minister Alex Hawke and New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet to put Jim Molan on their last remaining winnable Senate spot. She also took a whack at Hillsong Church and its former head pastor and mentor of Scott Morrison, Brian Houston. Connie also retold the controversial circumstances in which Scott Morrison obtained pre-selection in the seat of Cook in 2007. He lost the first pre-selection to Michael Toke, 82 votes to 8, but Toke was disendorsed by the New South Wales Liberal State Executive following allegations of branch stacking. Scott Morrison won the second ballot. Connie retold allegations that Scott Morrison played the race guard against Toke, allegedly telling pre-selectors we can't have a person of Lebanese background running for the Liberals in Cook. It was 18 months after the Cronulla riots took place in the electorate of Cook. Michael Toke won a defamation payout against News Corp for publishing the branch stacking allegations, as well as publishing allegations that Toke puffed up his resume. So Toke should have been the rightfully pre-selected candidate in Cook for the Liberals in 2007. Michael Toke sat down with Waleed Ali on the project last Wednesday night to talk about his experience during the Cook pre-selection battle and gave his own character assessment of Scott Morrison. The reason why Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells's character assessment of Morrison was so devastating is because it came from the right. Connie is a lifelong Christian conservative political warrior. She voted against same-sex marriage and in the last term of parliament voted with Pauline Hanson's bill to abolish vaccine passports and mandates. She was offered the position of ambassador to the Vatican to leave the Senate quietly. She's an Italian of Catholic of Italian descent, but she instead chose to tell the truth about Morrison. This past week also saw the outgoing member for Dawson, George Christensen, resign from the Liberal National Party of Queensland, stating that it was a party that no longer, well, in his words, seemed anything but conservative. So, and of course, we had last Friday the former Northern Territory Country Liberal Party Senator Sam McMahon announcing she would be recontesting the Senate, running for the Liberal Democrats. And there's also former Queensland LNP Premier Campbell Newman and former New South Wales Liberal Party reform activist John Ruddock also running for the Liberal Democrats in the Senate. And of course, during this parliamentary term, Scott Morrison also lost backbencher Craig Kelly, who now leads the United Australia Party, who was disgustingly assaulted by an well-organised Antifa hit job in Melbourne. There was a getaway vehicle after this woman assaulted him with an egg. And apparently these three Antifa extremists are still at large. Victoria Police are apparently still hunting them down. Also last Thursday on Q&A, Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs, Gideon Rosner, who has previously run for Liberal pre-selection, was also scathing of Scott Morrison's performance as Prime Minister.
My concern is what Scott Morrison has done to the Liberal Party and to liberalism, to the values that I subscribe to. My concern is the fact that the Morrison government has embroiled Australia in $1 trillion debt, that it's ramped up online censorship, that it made it a criminal offence for Australian citizens during the pandemic to re-enter their own country, rendering them stateless. The Morrison government engaged in that awful state-sanctioned theft that was robo-debt. I think those are much more important issues to talk to the Prime Minister's character and his judgment and his leadership. And I have to say, Scott Morrison would have to be, in my opinion, the worst Prime Minister the Liberal Party has put up since Billy McMahon, except Billy McMahon had principles.
And for those of you unaware, Billy McMahon, he was the Liberal Prime Minister of Australia from 1971 to 72. took over from John Gorton, never won an election in his own right, but is considered by both sides of politics to be a bumbling fool, and lost the 1972 election to Gough Whitlam. Now, turning to my featured guest, who I interviewed last Friday. As I do during shows that feature a pre-recorded interview, I'll be in the live chat, and then I'll be back live to wrap up the show at the end of the evening. Please enjoy my discussion about deconstructing ScoMo with Professor Augusto Zimmermann.
The Unshackled.net.
Concetta Fierravanti-Wells is far from the only conservative critic scathing of Scott Morrison's lack of conservative principles and actions while Prime Minister. Rocco Loiacono and Augusto Zimmermann have published a collection of critiques of Scott Morrison entitled Deconstructing ScoMo, Critical Reflections on Australia's 30th Prime Minister. That book is available from Lock Press. Augusto, he is a professor and the head of law at the Sheridan College of Higher Education in Perth. He is also the founder and president of the West Australian Legal Theory Association and former Law Reform Commissioner with the Law Reform Commission of Western Australia. He is the author and editor of numerous academic articles and books on fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. Augusto, welcome back to WilmsFront.
Thanks, Tim. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. I really appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. And we spoke around a year ago, post the West Australian state election. It's 1 year into the one party state with Mark McGowan. We'll get into the mess that the rabble of the WA Liberal Party is later in the show, but the rest of 2021 was, for both of us, was pretty much the same as 2020. We were locked down again in a draconian police state here in Melbourne and Victoria, and the hard border went up in Western Australia again.
Yes, it's a disgrace. Once you open a precedent of this nature, we will never be in peace again. They always find an excuse to be implementing further measures. So I'm not surprised that this is happening all over again. It is only going to stop when we make a decision, the people make a decision to put an end to these instances of oppression and tyranny that we are facing here in Australia. I find it quite ironic that Scott Morrison wants to fight for freedom in Ukraine, and he did nothing to protect us here in Australia from all these arbitrary measures that have violated so profoundly our fundamental rights and freedoms. I guess that if I were in Russia, I would not even be fearing so much for losing my job, because you know that in Western Australia, many people had to lose their jobs as a result of these impositions. So they cannot even have a coffee after that or grab a beer, because liquor shops and restaurants also are demanding this vaccine mandates. It's like total oppression and tyranny. It's a joke when he claims that he's going to Ukraine to set the people there free, when we have total tyranny and oppression taking place in this country.
Yeah, the irony of Scott Morrison to claim that we've got to stand up for freedom and democracy in Ukraine is a blind eye to what the state and territory leaders have subjected Australians to the past 2 years, and also the nerve of the various state leaders as well. I mean, Dan Andrews criticizing the leadership of the Russian Federation. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, it would be quite funny if it were not so tragic. we know very well that in the process of doing these terrible things, they have used a very Nazi method of imposing urgent or emergency powers. That is a very typical strategy used by tyrants to consolidate their power and to undermine the constitution. Let's not forget that in 1930s, in a certain country in Europe that everybody knows what country is, the leader of this nation, or that nation in particular, used emergency powers and renewed them constantly so that he could impose these violations of fundamental rights, even to the point of creating that total chaos that resulted in a Second World War. But more than that, ignoring the provisions of the Constitution itself, the Weimar Constitution was full of rights. It was even based on that idea that we need to have a Bill of Rights in the document. But the Constitution itself can be and will be always disregarded, any constitution whatsoever, when the elites or ruling classes can appeal to emergency. So the use of emergency powers is a common tool of illiberal oligarchs to actually undermine the rule of law and impose gross violations of, or create gross violations of fundamental rights. It's not uncommon to see this to happen in history. And of course, we are paying the price for a lack of vigilance and certainly for a lack of knowledge of history and know what history could tell us and teach to us so that we would be able to avoid the mistakes of the past.
You're a constitutional law expert, and Section 91 of the Australian Constitution has been completely disregarded, trashed, which is that trade, commerce and intercourse among the states shall be absolutely free. And Australia is not technically one anymore. Your state, Western Australia, still has entry requirements. I can't go to Western Australia because you have a triple vaccinated economy, which is has higher vaccine mandates and passports than here in Victoria. So I can't come. And Scott Morrison appeared aside Mark McGowan recently, where he said, where they sort of joked about the Mark McGowan about keeping Scott Morrison out like it was funny, his border closure cruelty. And of course, he backed the reopening border delay. And of course, that he's been enabling of these border closures since he cowardly backed out of Clive Palmer's first constitutional border challenge to the West Australian hard border.
Yes, absolutely. And what happened is that he even wrote a letter sending this to the Premier here in Western Australia, McGowan, to express his full support to this decision of closing the borders. And in order to do so, he certainly contacted others, including prominent federal politicians who also lent their support. As a result of that, the High Court felt that it was consensus amongst these political parties, the mainstream parties, that the borders should definitely be closed because of the idea that we are facing a very deadly virus. But this is, as you say, occurred in violation of a particular provision, namely the Section 92 of the Constitution, saying that the borders should be absolutely free. And the drafters had this in mind. So that's one of the reasons as to why we have a federation, that is the free movement of individuals being able to cross the borders. but the borders have been totally closed ever since. And not only that, but the premier has now even appointed the vaccine commander to be the to be the governor of Western Australia in reward for his very servile behavior and in upholding these measures and enforcing these measures on the people here in Western Australia. So Chris Dawson, who was the vaccine commander and the police, he remains as the police commissioner, has just been appointed the governor of Western Australia. So we see that the system is now not working as it should. And those who have been directly responsible for so much chaos and suffering and pain are now being duly rewarded for basically serving an oppressive and tyrannical regime. And McGowan is a very problematic character because not only he imposes these draconian measures that have destroyed so many lives, but he actually uses a very suspicious language to refer to these people, telling them that they have to grow a brain, they are drop kicks. All this language to dehumanize people reminds me of certain regimes of the 20th century that always start with this kind of language, but then they end up causing even more harm that we are seeing now. So this is the beginning of something that can potentially be extremely dangerous and destructive of our society.
And another cornerstone of Australia's constitution is the separation of powers. And we have seen, you mentioned the emergency powers provision of another country in the 1930s. Many Australians were unaware that there are all of these various public health acts ready to be enacted, which the premiers and the health ministers could just control all of their residents' lives just like that they could change it on a whim, that on this day you only allowed to do this, the next day it could get even more draconian.
Yes, the rules change on a daily basis, and that is one of the reasons as to why we can claim that the rule of law is not really being respected, because one of the characteristics of a government under the rule of law is that these legislations or laws, they have to actually be scrutinized, and they have to be passed by the proper branch of government that is responsible ultimately for the creation of the most substantive laws, namely the parliament. So what's happening here is the breach of that important doctrine of separation of powers that, according to experts, constitutional law professors and legal theories, is very important for the protection of individual rights and freedoms, and to the protection of constitutional, or preservation, better saying, of constitutional government. So the rules that are being imposed at the moment undermine the Westminster system, undermine the rule of law, and in many instances actually directly violate the constitution of this nation. So it's a very tragic reality of things, but I guess that this is what the ruling classes were expecting to do if you were not vigilant enough.
There's been two periods of Scott Morrison's prime ministership, and your book comments on both periods. There was the pre-pandemic Scott Morrison prime ministership, and then the post-pandemic prime ministership. But he has had the same political and ideological invacuous approach, that he's just done has done and said whatever he thinks will be politically expedient. Early in his prime ministership, just before the federal election, there was the Christchurch massacre, where he came out and was proposing all sorts of new restrictions on free speech. There's one before the Parliament to crack down on misinformation. And obviously his greatest or lack of action during the pandemic is his delegation of responsibility. He has always said during various stages of the pandemic, that's not my problem, that's a subject for the states. And Albanese is called each way elbow, but there's also each way ScoMo, saying, I don't like these vaccine mandates and passports, but my hands are tied. I can't do anything because I'm the prime minister. They're set by the states.
Yeah. Well, this is a major problem, as you say, because the problem with with Scott Morrison and his government is prior to the so-called pandemic. The IPA, the Institute of Public Affairs, may put this very clearly in the legal rights report, fundamental legal rights report, when the main drafter of this report, Morgan Berg, explained in this document that the Scott Morrison government is responsible, the coalition, for the worst violations of fundamental rights in the whole history of Australia. And the interesting thing about this is that this report is from 2018. So this is prior to the pandemic, so-called pandemic measures. And Scott Morrison has a track record of disregard, not only for freedom of speech, when he says that freedom of speech is not important. And I'm not here to say that the opposition leader would do anything better than this. He is absolutely dreadful as well. So we are in a very terrible situation where both prime minister and leader of the opposition are directly responsible for the current situation. But Scott Morrison also has a disregard for due process and natural justice. Not only he made a spurious accusation saying that indirectly making this accusation by saying that the terrorist in Christchurch was a right-winger, when then we realized later that that he was a radical environmentalist who loved communist China. That doesn't really make him a right-winger at all. And not only that, but at the top of this, he actually had a total abhorrence of Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump was a terrible president and so forth. That doesn't fit the bill as a right-winger. He's certainly not the case. But then Scott Morrison likes to make false accusations sometimes, including when he claimed that the justice system in Victoria had done a great job and that Cardinal Pell would definitely lose his Order of Australia. And then, of course, we now know that he has been acquitted by the High Court. But Scott Morrison assumed that Cardinal Pell was guilty, even to the point of threatening to remove his Order of Australia. This is absolutely outrageous. But he not only did that, but also accused defense forces in Afghanistan of having committed crimes against humanity, thereby giving ammunition to rogue regimes all over the world to be accusing us of violations, gross violations of human rights, when this was not subject to proper investigation and due process. He was accusing this nation, and the soldiers are fighting for on behalf of the Australian people in Afghanistan and protecting the people there, of having committed such terrible crimes. So I'm absolutely appalled to see that we don't even need Russia or China to be attacking us, because the Prime Minister is doing a very good job in destroying the rule of law in this nation.
And earlier this year, he also prejudiced the upcoming trial of the man accused of sexually assaulting Brittany Higgins, Bruce Lehrman, and
Yes.
there was many lawyers and legal academics rightfully scathing of his comments in the parliament, basically implying that a guilty verdict was already been passed. That basically it was beyond dispute, the allegations, and now Bruce Lehrman's lawyers, they're applying to the ACT courts for a permanent stay. But Morrison, he said that for politically expedient reasons, just to get Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame off his back, saying that his government had a problem with women.
Yeah, and let's not forget that his first reactions are always suspiciously authoritarian. His first comments on any case, matter whatsoever, is always against the rule of law, against individual rights. I can give an example of Israel Falal. He put something on his Facebook, a passage from the Bible. It's his private Facebook. You might disagree or agree. Who cares, you know? It was posted this on his private Facebook. And then he actually said that the rugby league had the right to do what they did, and that he was also very offended by the comments made by Israel Falal. Of course, his first reaction is like that. It's very bad always. But then he tried to correct himself, saying other things later on when he realized that his opinion was quite unpopular, especially amongst Christian circles, because, of course, he claims to be a Christian, and he tries to use this credential to basically deceive the useful idiots, as Lenin used to call. Unfortunately, there are many Christians who fall into this trap. But I can say, as actually a person who tries to take his faith seriously, that I can't see anything Christian about what he does. I don't think it's right and proper for a Christian person to be accusing others without enough evidence. And certainly, I would be in favor of extending religious freedom in a proper manner and not creating what he promised in a mosque about 3 years ago, which effectively amounts to Sharia law by stealth. That's the idea that religious organizations must be protected from criticism. I think we should have more freedom for all, and rather than having anti-discrimination law on religious grounds, which is definitely going the wrong authoritarian way, we should have more freedom, and we should have the restoration of freedoms that have been stolen by the likes of Scott Morrison and his mates in Parliament.
You were very rightfully critical from the very beginning of Scott Morrison and Christian Porter's religious discrimination bill, because as you just said, it could have the effect of actually protecting religious practices that are against Western values. And you just mentioned Sharia law. It would be much better to have remove laws that to increase religious freedoms, because you're just adding more anti-discrimination regulations on top of the existing ones. Last week I had John Steinoff of the Human Rights Law Alliance, where we discussed how
Steinhoff.
Yes, Steinhoff.
Yeah, he's great.
Discussed how this bill eventually went down quite badly in terms of the political consequences for the Morrison government, and in the end, it was basically nothing. The bill.
Yeah, well, they are so incompetent that they are unable to do anything proper and right. I knew that this would be a disaster because they are unable even to amend Section 18C, you know. Scott Morrison, when he was the treasurer, he said that it was unimportant for us in this nation to have freedom of speech because it doesn't create a job. I'm not so sure. I certainly think this is an idiotic statement. Not surprised to see him making sort of statement, but it's utterly false. And you know that Professor Peter Reed from James Cook University, not such a long time ago, lost his job because of free speech. So if free speech doesn't create a job, certainly you can lose one by trying to speak out something that can be totally correct from a scientific point of view, but debunking the arguments of the mainstream academia and media and so forth. So definitely there is no such thing as freedom of speech now in Australia, thanks to the likes of these politicians who are unable even to repeal a section that has been used to even, I refer to Section 18C, to even create discrimination and to create forms of race-based discrimination. Let's not, in this case, ignore that those students at QUT were complaining that a certain lab had been assigned to people who belonged to a particular color of skin. And they made a very valid argument that the best way to fight against discrimination is to not have discrimination, is to have equality. And that caused then that sort of headache that they were having to answer for such a fair comment before the Australian Human Rights Commission. So now if you fight against racism, you become a victim of the Section 18C, this relevant section. It's outrageous. But have you seen Scott Morrison saying anything about this? Have you seen any politicians, such as even Christian Porters, as you referred, complaining about this sort of situation? No, they couldn't care less. So it tells me that they also lack compassion and the desire to really do the right thing for the people and restore the freedom. So that they have no willingness. They are political opportunists, and I will be delighted when they kick it out from Parliament, because we deserve to have better representation in our parliaments.
And Scott Morrison's enabling of the trend against the rule of law, it can be argued cost Christian Porter, the former Attorney General, his political career, because a simple accusation ended his political career. We discussed the accusation against him last year when it first surfaced, but he attempted to sue the ABC and Louise Milligan. It was sort of he claimed he had a slight victory when the ABC said they could never prove the accusation against him, but it cost him his portfolio. He was shifted to, I can't even name the portfolio he took over. It was one of those ones that, but now he is quitting Parliament, and in his valedictory speech said that we've got to protect the rule of law at all costs. If only Scott Morrison acted upon that.
Yes, well, this case was doomed to be unsuccessful for Christian Porter because the article did not refer to him. It said that a certain minister had committed this crime. So, but he had to step in and to have to say that the article was about him. That makes it very difficult to win in a defamation case, because the article, as I say, didn't refer to him, didn't name him. Scott Morrison and him have introduced certain laws here that are very terribly problematic from the perspective of due process, and even empowering the state premiers to change their laws that ultimately removed the need for evidence. And when it comes to dreadful accusations of rape, of domestic violence, when I was a commissioner, I interacted with the then Attorney General, who was from the Liberal Party, and I showed him a pile of documents, something like this size, hundreds of pages of victims of false accusations, expecting that he would understand how dangerous this thing is about just believing in what a person might claim. Because you know that when it comes to family law disputes, a person can take a huge advantage by making such false allegations. And the Attorney General couldn't care less, and he was from the Liberal Party. I was outraged to see how a commissioner could be used for such terrible purposes of completely decharacterizing the report that we had produced, a report that you expect to be used for the purposes of amending the legislation in a proper manner, so that these principles that I have referred could be enhanced. And the outcome of the matter is that he did the very opposite of this, creating more of this undermining of these principles. And now we have more people having their lives destroyed, the lives of children and innocent people. And because these laws are written in a gender-neutral language, that can affect both men and women, you know. So it doesn't really matter. It's evil to allow these sort of things to happen. And it tells me that we do not have the rule of law in its full implementation here in Australia. We lack in the realization of the rule of law for many reasons, including these ones that I have just mentioned.
The new Attorney General who took over from Christian Porter, Michaela Cash, also a Western Australian, went all in to, again, help Scott Morrison neutralise the woman issue by adopting most of the recommendations of the Jenkins report, set the standard by sex discrimination Commissioner Kate Jenkins, which in terms of due process in workplace harassment claims, it's just further erosion of the rule of law in private employment settings.
Yeah, and you see that the Liberal Party itself, the Federal Liberal Party, via the demands of people such as Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, and others, have been now pushing for this idea of quota, a gender quota in Parliament. And I thought that the person representing me wouldn't be so concerned about gender identity. It's not important for me to be represented by a man, a woman, or whatever. I just think that if you are representing some of the people in Parliament, to represent everyone, it doesn't really matter. We should undoubtedly send the best and the most qualified people. And I guess that this is one of the reasons that we have this problem of representatives being so not qualified, is because it seems that they are sometimes sent to Parliament not on the basis of being competent, of having merit, but because they have certain biological attributes. That is a very totalitarian way to see things. And Robert Menzies would be horrified to see what's happening. Robert Menzies has even speeches in Parliament and even in conferences saying that women should be treated equally, and we should have the best people representing us. We should never have quota in the party. That's even a speech he made in the 1960s. So I just wonder what Menzies would think about what's happening now with the Liberal Party. He would probably do what I did. I was the Senior Vice President of the Liberal Party in my division, and I resigned in disgust because I have a name, a reputation, and I'm a serious man. I actually value liberty and the rule of law, and that's why I couldn't remain as a member of a party that is liberal only in name, but is comprised of characters who have no regard for individual rights and freedoms and the rule of law. So I did something that probably Menzies would be very proud of me.
Well, Scott Morrison's health experts now, they can't even define what a woman is. So it's become it's even been blurred, the biological definitions that initially underpinned these various gender quotas and gender agencies. Though the Morrison government...
I wouldn't be surprised if very soon you're going to have someone claiming to be a woman to have a seat in the Liberal Party. Very soon you're going to have this happening.
Oh, who knows what's going to be possible, allowed, or mandated in the future. Though the Morrison government, they did do something good at the end of last year. They appointed... a respected legal academic that you co-authored a book on 18C with Lorraine Finlay, and the right people were upset with her appointment because she doesn't believe in their definition of human rights. Can you, obviously,
Lorraine Finlay was my colleague at Murdoch, and as far as I know, she's a true liberal, a classical liberal. She has a desire to be an advocate for real human rights, the rights that are not invented by these social classes that are actually privileged to be considered on people on the basis of certain attributes, biologically or socially constructed. So we couldn't have a better human rights commissioner who actually has a concern for real human rights that tend to be sometimes undermined by the fake ones. Because, of course, real human rights and fake human rights can clash. And people who abhor freedom, who abhor the rule of law, always favor the fabricated rights of the oppressing ruling classes. So Lorraine is a woman who has a consideration for principles and elements of the rule of law, and she's an outstanding lecturer, which makes it quite surprising that she was appointed, because as far as I know, to be appointed for these positions, you have to be an idiot or serving the regime. So for her to be appointed is almost a miracle. And thanks for letting me know that Scott Morrison did something that I could agree with. I'm actually shocked to hear that I can agree with him on something. But certainly that was the only decent thing this government has ever done, to appoint a proper person to the Human Rights Commission. Apart from this, I don't think I can ever agree with anything he does, and I will be even quite worried if it happens.
Well, there was, when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister and Gillian Trigg's term as Human Rights Commission President expired, there was a campaign to draft you to be appointed as the new president, but sadly that didn't come to pass. But you and Lorraine on the Human Rights Commission, and well, let's add in if they appointed James Allen from the University of Queensland as well to the Human Rights Commission, then it would have been an actual Australian Human Rights Commission.
Yeah, but we are not left-wing enough. We are not like Scott Morrison, who happens to be turning the Liberal Party into another version of the Labour Party. So when I criticize Scott Morrison in the book, and by the way, the foreword of the book is written by Professor James Allen, we are not saying that if you finish reading the book, you're going to understand that we don't think it would be a good idea to vote for the other political party, the Labour Party, or to think that Albanese would do a better job. Of course, Scott Morrison has now the opportunity to go in history as the worst prime minister we have ever had. That's because he had this privilege to be the prime minister at this terrible moment in history. But I think that this honor would be not given to him. If Labour had won, it would go for Albanese. I think the only difference between Albanese and Scott Morrison is that Albanese is clearly bad, and he doesn't even pretend to not to be good, because of course everything he does is so sincere. But I have to tell you that sometimes the worst enemy is the one who pretends to be your friend. And when it comes to both of these characters, the main difference between both is that Scott Morrison is more deceptive, and he uses sometimes Christian terminology to deceive those who are not really properly considering the policies that his party has been implementing. But I think in many ways, it can be more dangerous than even Albanese, because he gives a false impression that we have a conservative government in power, when everything he does is to undermine the values, traditions of this nation, including when it comes to protecting fundamental rights and freedoms.
And also, it's come into focus since Conchetta Verivanti's Wells's speech, or should I say, come into further focus. Scott Morrison's troubled history with the truth. He was forced in an interview with 6 News last week to actually admit that he'd called Sam Dastyari Shanghai Sam. He denied it, even though it's still, that tweet is up calling him Shanghai Sam. And then also claiming that he hadn't been to Hillsong Church in 15 years. He always tries to sort of weasel his way out, saying, well, I didn't say that I never went to Hillsong. I just said it's not my church. And it's people on his own side who have been the most scathing. There's obviously the leaked correspondence about what Gladys Berejiklian has said about him, a horrible person, an evil bully, and that unnamed cabinet minister who called him a complete psycho. And I suspect that cabinet minister is probably the same one that texted Michael Toke to say that he believed him and supported him telling the truth.
Yes, indeed. And just to give an idea how bad this is, I decided then to write the book, because, the reason I had to write the book is that every day he comes up with something that outrages me. It's a collection of bad decisions, bad approaches to considerable issues pertaining to society. So I just thought, and then an approach to Rocco, we needed to actually consolidate these things, because it needs to be in history recorded of all these things that he has been causing to our nation. So the book is important, but I'll tell you one thing. It was impossible to record everything, because if I open the newspaper today, I'll have something about to say more about him. It's an unending source of inspiration for writers like me. So then I have to dedicate this book to Scott Morrison, because I wouldn't be able to do such a thing without his assistance. Scott Morrison definitely gives me a lot of reason to be writing articles and books and so forth, but it's not something that I take pleasure at all. I would rather to have a proper leader of this nation having a regard for the things that we so much value, the protection of rights and the rule of law. And then I would have written a book in praises of this leader. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Scott Morrison is an enemy of fundamental rights and freedoms, and he is, effectively speaking, causing a harm to this nation that's beyond any possible measure. I think it is really a disgrace that you have a prime minister who has so little regard for the little people, the common people of this nation, who are in a desperate need for the rights and freedoms to be finally given back and restored from them, because they have been, objectively speaking, being taken away.
And the reason he was so chummy with Mark McGowan when he came to Western Australia was he's trying to sandbag 4 West Australian federal Liberal electorates. Since the redistribution, the Liberals hold 10 seats out of 15, and there's 4 under threat at this election. There's Pearce, which Christian Porter is vacating. There's also Swan, which Steve Irons is vacating. There's Hasluck, held by Indigenous Affairs Minister Ken White. And then there's Tangi, which is held by Scott Morrison's right-hand man, Ben Morton.
Yeah, well, think about that. If he was so concerned about this terrible state of the Liberal Party in Western Australia, he would not be indirectly campaigning in favor of the Labour Party. He not only wrote that letter assuring the dictator here in Western Australia, McGowan, that the borders would definitely remain closed, because if there was a legal case eventually set to the attention of the High Court, that he would intervene in favor of the Labour government in Western Australia. So he promised loyalty to the Labour Party and not to the Constitution. But then he actually claimed victory here for the devastation of the Liberal Party when he said that McGowan only won in a landslide the election, therefore decimating, deservedly so, the Liberal Party. But Scott Morrison said, well, I am very much responsible for this. I mean, he was claiming credit for the decimation of the Liberal Party, saying that enough of this would have occurred if he had not manifested his full and unconditional support to oppression and tyranny. And then, at the top of this, let's not forget, because Tim, you live in Victoria, that Scott Morrison has mentioned the Premier of Victoria is doing an excellent job. He even said that he would give Dan Andrews unconditional support during that worst moment of the lockdowns in Victoria. He was saying that Dan Andrews was not doing a wrong thing, that he would even give Dan Andrews his unconditional support. So we now face the fact that these two parties are conspiring together against the best interests of the people in this nation. Well, I don't think a person in his normal mind would contemplate to return these people to power in the next election. We have to make very clear that we are very unhappy with the current status quo in this nation.
There literally is no opposition in Western Australia, because the Liberal Party is so weak, both in what they stand for and politically. They were reduced to a rump in the West Australian Legislative Assembly at the 2021 state election, 2 seats. The National Party is the official opposition. In the review into what went so badly for the WA Liberals, blame was put at a power-broking group referred to as the Clan, and its senior members, former Finance Minister WA Senator Matthias Cormann, now head of the OECD, former Minister Peter Collier, and the other one there is
Nick Goran. That is Nick Goran. Yeah. Nick is a good guy. Nick is one of the few decent members of parliament that we have in Western Australia. I remember that when I was a commissioner, I mentioned to him that the bill that the Liberal Party was introduced, apart from these other bills that they introduced, destroying the rule of law and destroying protection against false accusations, I can refer even to the Health Act that was introduced under the Colin Barnett government. So what McGowan is doing here in Western Australia is a result of a bill introduced and passed by the previous Liberal government. So it's amazing. But Nick Goran is a good man, and he tries to do the right thing. But the point is that the leader of the party now is a person who is pretty much responsible for the problem, because he proposed, David Honey, a policy that was considered to be so stupid and radical that I guess not even the Greens would embrace it. That was to stop with coal, burning of coal in a period of 5 years. So by 5 years, we would have no coal in Western Australia. This is so stupid that nobody took it seriously, apart from making in their minds the decision to never vote for a party that proposes such a stupid idea. And of course, he got rewarded for his stupid idea, and he is now the leader of the party. I guess that if you really have something really bad that is probably alienating more voters, you can potentially be chosen as the leader of this party. And I'm not so sure whether he did such a thing, but the Australian Financial Review claimed that that he also accused Christians for being responsible for the decimation of the party in that particular election, saying that the problem in the party is that there are too many Christians and the influence of Christians in the party. Well, he would probably have an issue with Robert Menzies, by the way, because I have the books of Robert Menzies behind me here, where he was a very proud Presbyterian and always acknowledging the fact that he was doing something that he believed to be ultimately pleasing God. So I guess this would lead to his expulsion of the party, because if you make such remarks, you're considered to be too radical.
Well, the South Australian Liberal Party, in their term in office, they blocked Christians from joining the party, excluded Conservatives from the Marshall government, and voted out in a landslide electing a Conservative Labor Premier, which is a rarity these days. Peter Malinauskas actually quite more conservative in his values than Stephen Marshall. And going to New South Wales, the only mainland state where the Liberals are still in power, there was a lot of hope that Dom Perrottet, being a conservative Catholic, would repair the state in a freedom libertarian direction, but he's fallen into line with health measures that he admitted did nothing, such as QR codes, and he's just succumbed to Brad Hazard and Kerry Chant on a number of occasions, and he's also facilitated Scott Morrison's federal intervention in the Liberal Party, which was concocted by his man on the New South Wales State Executive, Alex Hawke, to save his own pre-selection, made sure that there were no pre-selections. So Scott Morrison, Dominic Perrottet selected 12 candidates just last weekend for the federal election, and expelled the party member who brought a federal and high court challenge to it. Matthew Kamanzuli. I probably mispronounced that as well. It's a Maltese name, I'm told.
Yeah. Well, you see, this is a great tragedy, because some people had expectations, held very good expectations about the new premier in New South Wales, but one of the signs that he would not be able, or willing even to resist and to do the right thing, was the fact that he kept Brad Hazard as the health minister. This person, the way he talks, I think he needs anger management. And certainly it's the behavior of a brutal and even psychopathic dictator. He talks in a way that's actually utterly aggressive and offensive. He calls people names, and it's just completely erratic, the behavior of this person. It makes me wonder how on earth the population of a free society would actually tolerate the sort of language that's being employed by some of these characters. It's utterly offensive, and it actually makes me wonder whether they really think that they are equal citizens before the law, because we would expect that politicians represent us in parliament, and ultimately they are working for us. They should be regarded as even employees, you know. Can you imagine if I go to my boss here at Sheridan and talk to him like that? Well, this guy was elected by us. We have to dismiss these people, especially Brad Hazard. We have to fire a person like that because you have no right to offend your employer, namely the citizens who elected him, in such a manner. I mean, and of course, then we have to be merciful enough to perhaps give him some financial contribution for him to go to a clinic where he can be treated, because his behavior is of a lunatic. And it's really disturbing to see the intensity of the hatred towards the population in this country by these ruling politicians. So there is something intrinsically wrong when we tolerate this sort of behavior coming from our elected representatives. They don't think they are like us, and they don't think they are under the rule of law.
Oh, you wonder what Brad Hazard was like as a high school teacher all those years back. No wonder he moved on to the legal profession. But he's been a career politician. I mean, he's been in the parliament for 30 years. He's now 70. I mean, is it just about power and privilege for him to continue in that age as well? And this is another problem with the a lot of the people elected to parliament. They want power for power's sake, right in the cars with the flag on the bonnets. And even those who came to parliament with a lot of strong principles to begin with, they do what is politically expedient. It's quite I'm quite perplexed. Tim Wilson, member for Goldstein, pushing renewable energy so much when 10 years ago he was part of the Institute of Government Affairs, which fought against these sorts of government measures to push renewable energy.
Yeah, and he was also a fierce advocate for freedom of speech, and he has done nothing about free speech, you know. So it seems that once he became a member of parliament, he suffers now from amnesia, and he has forgotten everything he stood for in the past. It's really a demonstration that once you are part of this ruling class, you just forget your own identity or character and the things that you fought for in the past. I just wonder what my friends in the IPA think about Tim Wilson now. It'd be good to ask John Roskin what he thinks about him. And certainly you have to make it very clear that these people who have ignored what they had promised in the past, that these will be held accountable when it comes to the chance that we have to make better decisions. I think this next election will be quite crucial for the future of this nation. And certainly I have never expected anything so good to come from this sort of people. But I hope the population in general here in Australia, in our nation, are not going to once again disappoint us. We have now to vote much better. We cannot afford another mistake this time, otherwise it will be too late, and the price will be very, very dear indeed.
I mean, the only reason to, I would say, preference the Liberals before the Labor and Greens Party is because, and you don't touch upon the national security challenges that we're facing in your book, but that is the only reason to put the Liberals ahead of Labor, because having Penny Wong as the foreign minister, who's been a CCP apologist, and Christina Keneally as the Home Affairs Minister, who, well, she is terrible on freedom and free speech, and she also stumbles into various photo ops with CCP linked groups. I mean, her in charge of ASIO, the AFP, the Border Force. I mean, she's actually attacked the Unshackled directly in an op-ed.
So you must be doing something really good then.
I know, but it's more frightening if she was given this immense control over Australia's security agencies. So that's the only thing that is in Scott Morrison and the Liberals' favour. They're not Labor. They're not going to have all those people in their cabinet. But another thing you've also touched upon is there is no fiscal responsibility management in the Liberal Party anymore. I mean, they've just spent like crazy in this budget and over the past 2 years.
Yes. Well, you see that we should thank God for having then the preferential voting system. So it doesn't mean that you should put Labor ahead of the Liberals. I think it's important to put everyone there at the very bottom, but then the order from bottom up needs to be wise. So certainly I would put at the very bottom either Liberal, I will correct myself, either Labor or the Greens. So they should go at the very bottom. And then after that, you can make up your mind. But I don't think we should reward bad politicians. There are a couple of politicians in the Liberal Party who are good people. Gerard Rumik, Remick, and there is Alex Antic, and it's hard to find some more than that, but you can find some good people. Alex Antic is very good,
yes,
and Gerard as well. So we vote for them because these are the kind of people who would never even hold a portfolio with Scott Morrison. They are too good to be members of cabinet. It seems that to be a member of his cabinet, you must be incompetent and certainly not very liberal.
One of his right-hand men in the cabinet, Stuart Robert, I mean, he's proven himself very incompetent, but is still in the cabinet.
Yes, absolutely. So that's because it fits the requirement then. Oh, look, Tina, I need to go. I have to have a meeting in 5 minutes. But I must say to you, it's good to talk to you.
Yep, and if anybody wants to get a copy of the book, they can get it at lockpress.com. I'll let you go now, but thank you so much for your time and analysis, and we'll hopefully catch up again post-election to see what you make of whatever the next government is made up of.
Yeah, we need to make sure to hold the balance of power in the upper house. So what I'm telling people, especially when it comes to the Senate, is that they have the opportunity to control the government. We must make sure that good people can hold the balance of power in the Senate. So it's possible. There is still a hope, but certainly we have to be wise and make the right choices this time.
Yeah, definitely. Amen to that. Take care.
Thank you so much, and God bless you, and keep up the good work. I really admire what you do.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net.
And we're back live. So I always enjoy when it's a pre-recorded show. Obviously, I always like all of my interviews to be live, but it's not always possible. But I do enjoy interacting with my followers in the live chat during when those shows are playing, rather than obviously when I'm on air. It's hard to, obviously I can interact on air, but I can't sort of get into in-depth discussions with a lot of you in the chat, which I always enjoy. And Dawn Browning, it's because Augusto mentioned at the end that preferential voting means that you can put minor parties that in this election are more pro-freedom before the majors. So yes, there is Topher Field's video on how preferential voting works. And there's also Pauline Hanson's Please Explain cartoons, had one voiced by John Burgess. So your vote is powerful this election. I noticed that there was a few at the beginning of the chat saying that they intend to donkey vote. Please take your vote seriously. We do have a very integral elections here in Australia, and plus I can't advocate for any of you to do anything else other than vote validly, because to say anything else would be against AEC regulations. But definitely want all of you to cast a valid, well-informed vote. And we'll be here at the Unshackled on WilmsFront, Tim's News Explosion, and Trad Tasman Talk, covering and analysing the election, which there's 40 days to go. It's an incredibly long campaign of 6 weeks, and obviously Scott Morrison, the reason why he called it for this long, because he wants more time for Albo to be able to trip himself up. I mean, he succeeded on the first day. Who knows what other gaffes there were going to be? And Scott Morrison, obviously, he is a good campaigner, as 2019 proved. I mean, we discussed all his flaws with Augusto Zimmermann before, but one thing he's good at is election campaigning there. And we'll be covering not just the lead up to the election, but election night here at the Unshackled, with an election night live stream, 6 p.m. Melbourne time, when the polls close on the eastern states. So it'll be myself and a panel of regular contributors. Stephen Berry of Trad Tasman Talk, he'll be a panelist. So will Kyle Kutazi, who's been a regular guest on WilmsFront. I'll go into more about what's happened so far in the campaign on tomorrow night's Trad Tasman Talk, 7 p.m. Melbourne time, 9 p.m. Auckland time, on the Unshackled's YouTube channel. Due has got his voice back, which is why we had to postpone last Friday's show, but he's all good and can say a lot. And there's quite a bit happening across the ditch as well, across the Tasman Sea. And then on Thursday, another WilmsFront with independent Victorian Senate candidate Damien Richardson of Cafe Lockout, a former actor. I'm looking forward to chatting with him about his campaign and also his experience in showbiz in Australia. There will be no Trad Tasman Talk this Good Friday because, well, it's the most holiest day on the Trad calendar, and so it'd be inappropriate for us to have a show on Good Friday, but back on Easter Monday for a Tim's News Explosion. Been trying to have little news blasts in each of my WilmsFront episodes. So it'll return a dedicated news explosion after 3 weeks. It's just when these interviews align for WilmsFront, it's best to get them out there in a timely manner. So I hope you've enjoyed the festival of WilmsFront episodes throughout the fortnight, but this time next week it'll be back with Tim's News Explosion. So take care, everyone. I'll see you again tomorrow night, as I mentioned, 7 p.m. Melbourne time on the Unshackled YouTube channel for Tim's News Explosion, where I'll go in my Australian report section to what's been happening in the campaign, and also, well, the other degenerate things that have been happening in Australia as well, because there's been some shocking developments over the past week. All right, take care, everyone. Good night. See you tomorrow. Stay safe. Stay sane.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the Unshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.